This is the Instant Speed Podcast brought to you by Red Riot Games. You can support the podcast by checking out Red Riot Games using the link in this video or podcast app that you're using. My name is Matt, or you can call me Flake, and we've got the facts coming at you real hot and heavy here. Number one, well, the updates to the national championships. The information is slowly trickling out for a lot of these events. I know a lot of you are still waiting, especially me in Canada, figuring out when it's going to be, where it's going to be, and if I'm invited. I mean, there's so much left that needs to be said, and it's slowly coming out. And for one, well, we do know that the 90-day XP invites are going out between October 4th and October 8th, as per fabtcg.com. So check your emails if you're expecting an invite. Check those spam folders. So anytime between October 4th and October 8th is when you should be getting those. And if you do not get one, but you should be contacting them ASAP. Also, Flesh and Blood will be at SCG Con in Virginia. Yes, Star City Games Convention is going to be happening in Virginia between October 29th and 31st, and there's going to be some prizes to be had, including formats for Blitz, Sealed, Classic Constructed, so if you're into getting your competitive game going, head on over to SCG Con in Virginia. Again, October 29th to the 31st. And hey, why not? Let's go take a look at some other stuff. Are you interested in judging? Do you want to be a fab judge? Well, there is a new article up on fabtcg.com regarding the code of conduct, concerning judging and just how you can go about being not just a good judge, but a morally adjusted judge. That's what I guess we're getting at. And speaking of judgy looks and being morally adjusted, we've got a hell of a guest today. He goes by the name of Admirable. Speaking, of course, about Nathan Zamora, he joins us on the Instant Speed Podcast. The Instant Speed Podcast is thrilled to welcome the legend within esports, a true pillar of the CCG community, and the only guy I know that really gets 99% of my 1990s references. I'm talking about Nathan Zamora. You know him as Admirable. Nice to see you. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me here, Flake. I just, for my entire life, I've always been thinking to myself, you know what? You should do some podcast stuff. So I'm glad that someone's actually just kind of, almost forcing me to do this by asking me and me going, yes, I would love to.
Well, it was, frankly, let's just be completely fair here. The fact that you're on the show, this is one of the episodes I'm most excited for because I know that there's going to be a lot of questions and discussion where you and I are just going to go off on a tangent and we will be on track, but everything's going to be out in the distance for everyone else. But it's okay. If you're
plenty
listening
of branches
to this from home, oh yeah, for sure.
Plenty of branches.
Just watch for the smoke signals and follow the North Star. You'll get there. So basically, we open this the same way, and which is an origin story. And typically, it's the path and what got you to where you are today, and specifically with Flesh and Blood and your involvement with it. A lot of people will know who you are from your history in CCGs, Hearthstone specifically. You've been involved in TFT and Card CCG as well as other titles as well. But I mean, for those of you who are just getting introduced, because I know Flesh and Blood has brought a lot of people into card gaming, how have you got to where you are today with Flesh and Blood, and what is that your involvement with it, your passion for the game?
Yeah, so I got introduced to Flesh and Blood sort of by honestly via Twitter, where I just kept seeing people mention Flesh and Blood and mention Flesh and Blood and Flesh and Blood. And so what I did is I was like, I don't know what this Flesh and Blood card game is, but I'm gonna go take a look real quick. And I looked up a card and I went, ooh, this isn't really naturally my aesthetic sort of thing. It's kind of got this samurai-esque fantasy feel going on, and that kind of pushed me away a little bit at first, just because I haven't really felt like I was super into that sort of thing. Like Legend of the Five Rings was in that same capacity. The aesthetic appeal wasn't really the big part of why I played Legend of the Five Rings, even when I did play, even though I wasn't super into it. And so I kind of just stepped away a little bit. But then I just kept seeing people mention Flesh and Blood. And I was like, man, people seem to really like this game. And it was one of the first times I'd never really given a game a test by the engine of the game, but rather just by the aesthetic of it. And I was like, well, why am I so concerned with the aesthetic of this? I've literally played card games my entire life because they were fun. So I was like, okay, let me go look up a game of this real quick. And so I went to go look up the rules of Flesh and Blood. I am sorry, LSS Studios, your introduction video how to play the game sucks. It's one of the worst videos I've ever seen. The explanation is horrible, and I left feeling like I understood the game less, despite the fact that going into it, I understood the game zero. And so what I did is then I just went and read the rules real quick. And I was like, oh, this game's awesome. And so I started kind of looking into it and just seeing like if I could find somebody I knew that played the game. And the answer was there was tons of people I had acquaintances with that played the game, but nobody I really knew that played the game. And that's when I kind of stumbled into the idea that you had played the game, and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna give this a little bit of a drive. I'm gonna try to play this a little bit and see how it works because this does feel like a very strong game engine to me. And so I downloaded Tabletop Simulator. I found a video that kind of walked me through that a little bit, and then I started shuffling up a deck just to goldfish it, just to like play some games as though I were against an imaginary opponent and see what happened. And holy crap, the game just felt like it was such a rapid-paced idea with such a healthy flow of time and energy through the game that I went, this is it. Like, wow. It's been a long time since I have played a new card game engine that wasn't just like linear scaling resource points and then playing your big stuff at the end of the game or, curving out or what have you. There was like so many inflection points in the game that had little tiny minor details to it until it hit a critical mass point. And I was like, I want to learn this game so much more. Like I enjoyed the game Slay the Spire a lot. It's like it's a one player roguelike card game. And this game feels like Slay the Spire, except in a 1v1 capacity, as though you and I, Flake, are both attempting to slay the Spire, but we have run into each other at this point, and it's we stare each other down and we go, only one of us can proceed through that door. And so we bust out all of our relics, and here we go. What cards were you able to draft to get to this point? That feels like Flesh and Blood, and holy crap, that's exciting to me.
Before the slay the spire, it's like I run into you, Admirable, and it's like, okay, you must slay this Geyer before you slay the spire. and I get it. It's absolutely cool. And I honestly think that this is a situation, I think this game could actually create some pretty intriguing, like almost like PvE puzzle type scenarios, which would be kind of fascinating as well. I think that's kind of cool. And I agree. The tutorial video that LSS put out took I watched it. I sat down and tried to play a game, and I had to go seek other resources to sort of flesh out a little bit of the missing pieces. Ultimately, it came down to the professor and his video that sort of helped out a little bit more. So props to him for putting that out. But the rule book also exists for reading, and I like what you mentioned about the fact that we first played, and when we went through the basic rules, you're like, okay, I got this. What is the most least played, ridiculous, stupid hero? I say stupid, but and it was Kano, and that was the first one that you kind of dropped into. And I love this because Kano for many is not necessarily a meme, but it takes this kind of finesse and flair that very few players are going to just touch upon and really have an appeal for right out of the box, because Kano takes a lot of planning, playing within the margins. It's not your turn, it's our turn kind of scenario. And the best thing that you said to me is when I showed you this, you're like, you played one game. It was like the first or second game you ever played, and you're like, okay, this is my guy. I want to break this. This can be broken. And just talk to me about why Kano appeals to you particularly, and not just from a Flesh and Blood perspective of, oh, this game is great and it's awesome, but why Kano specifically?
So I'm going to go kind of backwards on these questions because it feels like a natural order to me. Kano specifically, why does Kano appeal to me so much? To me, I've always liked the idea of like the wizardry aspect of it, but I've never really liked this traditional idea of like wizards go to school and they use a wand and they must adhere to the rules of the wizards. Like, it's a fucking wizard, all right? We're talking, this person can summon these like powerful ethereal presence of just elements of the universe and manipulate it to their will. Why the fuck is this person going to follow any rules that anyone has for them? They're not, okay? They're going to do whatever they want. But what's going to happen in that aspect is because you're having to use all this brain power stuff, you really, really, really underestimate your need for physical presence. And so that's why Kano has 30 health right there. He doesn't do any push-ups. He does not go jogging. That guy summons apples when he feels like it, and when he doesn't want apples, instead he conjures apple pie instead. And he heats it up with some lava crap, and then he consumes it, and then he moves about his day. All right, that's Kano. And so when you have that sort of powerful mental presence, all of these elements that are happening so rapidly in your brain that you're like, I need to make this happen. And so preparation is really the key to that. You have to have everything planned, but everything's planned ahead of time. So when you get introduced to these new aspects that you haven't encountered yet, you better be able to use your intuition in a very strong element. And that to me is how Kano's going to work. He's got some of the most powerful cards that are in the game, but you have to make everything work together. And that's like the school of wizardry to me. How do you make everything you have work together properly? And so that's why I wanted to get Kano done. He breaks all the rules of like the normal game engine. He's not attacking you. He's casting spells, but the spells take certain aspects of it. But you can kind of link things together, but you got to be doing it properly. And as you said, it's not your turn, it's our turn. That last final turn, that's why Kano has 10 less health. It's because he can kill you on your turn, and that's a very rare aspect of this game, and I think it will continue to be for the duration of its existence.
I was playing in a league, and one of my opponents, my only loss in this league before they kind of like in the Swiss rounds or whatever, went 4-1. My only loss was to Kano, and essentially it came down to the fact again where it's a day late, a buck short, but at the end of the day, you miss the train no matter what, because you're there and you get that Kano player down to 1. It was 1, and basically they draw up, they pass the turn, and then you present your Kodachi, and they're like, okay, no defense, but hold on, and you're like, oh dear Jesus, and I'm like. And I was at like 15 or 16 health. And it's basically one of those scenarios where you basically just look at them. You're like, do you have it? And they're like, probably. And it's like, well, here we go. A fascinating hero that, frankly, it really rewards players who have a background in other card games that operate at instant speed. For instance, if you're a Magic player, you understand Magic, you know that, there are these little margins within the turn order, the phases, where you can do damage that your opponent doesn't necessarily have access to responding to.
Yeah. Kind of drawing back to, that's honestly, you may have like epiphanied one of the reasons why Kano is so appealing to me as well. When I first started playing card games, I was 11 years old, and my first deck that I ever built without assistance from someone else was at about 12 years old. And it was right before the set Tempest came out, I think. Or it might have been right when Tempest came out. I don't remember. This is 1997, this memory is being drawn from. But I won a local tournament. And the reason I won a local tournament is because of instant speed burn spells. It was turn 4, and I went to my opponent's end of turn 3, and I chucked all my burn spells at him. And then I went to turn 4, and I went, holy crap, I can chuck all my burn spells again. And if I don't need to chuck them right now, I don't have to try. And I can just kind of wait until they spend their mana, because they're playing counter spell cards in their deck. And they tapped 4 mana, and then I chucked all the rest of my burn at them, and I went instant speed rocks. And that's how I won my first tournament, was chucking a bunch of instant speed burn spells at somebody. And honestly, I think that's probably one of the reasons I like Kano so much, is it's very reminiscent of that first local tournament win where I defeated the other 9 players that were there.
One of the scariest things is when a Kano player says, do I have priority? Or do you pass priority? And you're like, oh, Lord, why? Why? No one else cares about this. Why you? Why now? Am I dead? Eventually, though, Admirable, you kind of, I don't want to say you saw the light. I'm not saying that you kind of lost your luster for Kano.
I saw the darkness.
You did see the darkness, because eventually you went up against a deck that no longer is as powerful as it once was because of bans and such. But you were kind of preparing. You wanted to go to the Calling Las Vegas and say, you know what, I want to be that Kano guy. I want to be the one that nobody sees coming. I want to master this to figure out that how I can beat people in those 3 turns on their own turn, and just be not necessarily a story, but be a nuisance, be that thorn, be that small percentage of players playing this hero. But eventually you sort of ran into Chain, and you're like, what the hell? Why would you play anything else?
Well, so Chain wasn't the reason that I decided to do that, by the way. So Chain definitely, I think that, is what at the time was just the most powerful deck. I think that, this is going to be like a huge digression point, but I do think that Bolton had a slight edge against Chain and was pretty strong against the rest of the format. I think Bolton probably would have been the other deck I played, but I didn't have time to practice it. I digress. The reason that Chain came into my my visual pathway was because that Kano just had such natural barriers. Like Prism was an extremely difficult matchup. I could not figure out a way to defeat Prism decks other than just completely altering the way that the Kano deck was built, which you could alter it to defeat Prism, but then you really weren't that strong against anybody else. They kind of just raced you really hard. And Dash was also another problem that I ran into with Kano, where they just had natural arcane barriers. And I was like, it's really tough to race these heroes because they have such cheap elements of dealing damage It doesn't really require a lot of resources from them to actually like just, kind of chip away at your life. But they have these natural barriers set up where you can't have your powerful Kano turns. And I was like, I expect Prism to be very popular at this. Like Prism seems like an extremely popular hero that people just like playing. It was also quite a powerful deck. Dash was a deck that felt like it was very, if you're kind of stepping into to Flesh and Blood for the first time, this feels like a very natural element to go because it's doing a lot of things that feel very traditional card game-esque, where you're like setting up some turns and getting some natural increments to your deck total built up. And so with those two heroes, I expected to be fairly popular. Kano was not doing well against those. Kano did, however, in my experience, operate pretty well against Chain. You had some pretty strong, pushes there, and you were completely ignoring Carry and Husk, which is one of the reasons that I think Chain was so powerful. And so once I started practicing it, what I realized is that, wait a second, players are not playing the game the same way I am. Players, when I'm playing Kano, are kind of naturally playing the game better because what they're doing is they're just chucking as much damage at me as they can. They're not trying to set up any turns, not trying to do any fancy play syndrome stuff. They're just like, this is Kano. He has 30 health. I'm just going to start attacking. And I was like, okay, it kind of naturally gives players even the right element of what to do against me. With Chain, though, players just felt like, I don't know. It feels like they just like their mindset just gets altered all of a sudden, as though he's doing like some sort of weird Jedi mind trick on them. And they're just deciding, you know what? I'm just going to play the game bad right now. And I would watch them play, and like everything would be fine right up until this point where they decided I'm just going to block every turn no matter what. I'm like, yeah, maybe like you just like try to like skate that life total down to a little bit, and then like hit me really, really, really hard, and then threaten lethal, make me block everything, and then I get blood deaded for 5. That's like the way you beat Chain, and nobody was doing that. And I was like, this here is naturally very powerful. It's very strong against what everyone's trying to do, and really the only bad matchup I think I have is Bolton, and I watch players play Bolton. They don't play it very well. So I'm just going to go with Chain to this one. I couldn't go Kano because it just had too many natural obstacles. Sucked.
And you actually finished very well at the Calling Las Vegas. Again, this is for someone who didn't have a whole lot of experience in the game prior to this. Your first major foray into any competitive scene, frankly, was the Calling. It was the big one. And you did well.
I finished at 9-2. I think the 2 matches I lost, the first one I think was going to be really hard to win, but I made a huge error just on the first turn of the game. And I think that cost me the game. And like the way that tiebreakers worked is what made me finish 13th. And the tiebreaker, I think the rule was the way that worked was like when your loss occurred, not who your loss occurred to. So my first loss in the Calling was round 2. And then my next one was round 9. But the one being at like round 2, that kind of like cost me the top 8 potential unless I went X and 1, which naturally I lost there. I do want to talk about that second loss though, because this was a really interesting one to me. So my opponent was very much treated me as though they knew me, and I was like, oh, okay, I just maybe they just recognized me and stuff. It's not an uncommon experience, and after the game, we talked about it, and we kind of went through some ideas, and they said they made this one mistake, and I was like, oh, I thought this was like a really next level bluff you were doing, because it made me not block, and if I would have blocked this turn, I probably would have won. And I was like, and I think that was just like a good play. And they sat there and they talked, and then the round got announced, and they went, oh, and they picked up their stuff, and they just started chucking it to the bathroom. And I was like, oh, they just had to pee this entire time. No wonder they were talking so fast. It wasn't because of me. I knew who this person was, and it's actually a mod of my Twitch channel is friends with this player that I got paired with, who has been very involved with card games and enjoyed the tournament scene, for pretty much their duration of playing cards. And that's who I lost to. And I was like, wow, so I lost to like somebody who's like actually like involved in the card game scene too. It's not just like a Flesh and Blood player I lost to. It's somebody that I actually have a one-step connection with, but that since they did not mention that, I had no idea that's who it was. And so in addition to the fact that my loss was to somebody who accidentally next level bluffed me, but in addition to that, somebody who is like very actively involved in card games and is literally a one-step process away, I felt so not bad about the loss after that. Normally I feel pretty bad about losses. And so this one, I remember when they were announcing the top 8 and we're standing there, I was like, man, I really don't want to be 9th place. And then when they hit the 8th name and it wasn't me, I was like, because I thought I'd made it with the 9 and 2. And I walked up the thing, I was like, oh, 13th. Oh, there's 4 players that have it worse than me right now, or 3 players that have it worse than me right now, or 4 players. I don't know the math on this. 9, 10, 11, 12. 4 players. And I was like, you know what? That loss was pretty cool, because now that's somebody who I lost to. That person also made top 8, which I thought was really cool. And they were like literally one step away from having like a direct connection with me. I think it's just like a very unrealistic experience that I think happens more commonly in physical card game tournaments than is really noted. And so it was just like a cool experience that I had, and I really enjoyed the event a lot. And it's just, golly, physical card games give me such like a weird, satisfying serotonin in my head that just I don't get from anything else. It feels very weird. It's like that Rounders quote where he's like, I felt alive for the first time. And she's like, you just told me you felt alive for the first time at a card table. And I'm like, yeah, let's go, Matt Damon.
That was great. That's also the ones where like, did you have it? You know what? I don't remember. So that whole scene where he tosses the cards away, I thought that was a great scene.
Where Johnny Chan just looks like he's
Johnny
like
Chan,
cards of the mafia.
Yeah. It's all done in like slow motion with the Matt Damon voiceover, kind of mouthing over Johnny Chan's voice there. Did you have it? I don't remember. Tosses him away with that's such a good scene. And that's
the best in the world. And I won. It's like you won one hand against him, Damon. Let's settle down for a second here. If somebody's bluffing me that hard, they probably get the first one from me.
Exactly. And then like literally 2 scenes later, he's at his law professor's bar asking him for money to go play against Teddy KGB. Yeah. Oh man.
His intent wasn't to play, it was to get $15,000. And since he only got 10, he's like, I guess I gotta gamble.
Yep. Yeah. What a
like when luck shuts the door, you gotta open up the window.
All day, all night, chick. So good. That is a great movie. That's what I'm doing. What I'm doing tonight. Now your experience in Vegas, obviously, we just went through just one particular game, but the whole experience as a from a macroscopic level. I mean, you as a single player, there was a lot of tweets that went out, a lot of people talking about the fact that it was just great to have card games on this level. It was a nice snapshot of what the health of the game was. A lot of people thought that it was a flash in the pan, when in reality, it's still going strong. There's still lots of events that are lined up for this and next year. Nationals haven't even begun yet, and I know a lot of people are still with their secret brews with new cards coming out. But for you, after that 9-2 finish, are you looking to actually continue with perhaps another showing at the Calling? Is there any competitive fire that has been ignited that still burns, that is maybe driving you more to explore that competitive fire that you said that maybe you abandoned a few years ago?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like the idea of competition is kind of always going to be just internalized somewhere inside me. I definitely enjoy the entertainment aspect a ton, and I definitely feel like that storytelling was a bigger passion of mine than I realized for decades, literally. But competing is like that's part of the storytelling experience. It's like sometimes you have to make the story as well. You have to have an experience that develops the story, and understanding like how the game feels and how a tournament aspect is happening, and then being able to relate that to someone else's experience and then kind of elaborate on that feel. That's a very real part, I think, of this whole thing. When I look at, like, for instance, I cast Hearthstone for 6.5, 7 years. Competing was part of the reason I felt like I was so able to tell these stories and relate these players and highlight their experiences and really point out some of the more special aspects of them, despite the fact that it may seem very simplistic, is because I was experiencing that myself. Not quite to the same degree because I wasn't winning these events, but I was coming very, very close. And every single time I lost, it was always like some stupid ass calling that I made where I'm going to play this dumb deck, or let me try this weird fancy play for no reason. And I just was really I just ignored so many fundamentals of it when I was competing. And I've pretty much done that like my entire life too. It's like I get to these points and I'm like, man, I really want to win this tournament, but I really want to try this dumb idea that I have. Let's see how the dumb idea works. And then flash forward, I've completely lost the game. And I'm like, why did I do that? And then that thought, sizzles in the back of my head for the next 12 years or whatever. That's been a very common experience for me. So kind of like, highlight that with Flesh and Blood. Again, it's a very unique game engine. And that's kind of what drives my interest in it, is that they have found a different way to approach the way that you play a card game 1v1. I very much enjoy that. And if you're able to turn this into a tournament experience where the players have enough agency that you will see a differential between players consistently finishing in the top brackets and, not, and learning and enjoying the game for different aspects, et cetera, you have a real card game. And that's kind of like the entire approach they've had, is like from the base level up, is like, well, what does this game look like if it gets to this point? And that was like part of, from what I've read anyway, the whole planning process for the game was, how do we build that base level and really stack it up to the top? And I feel like they're really on to the verge of something here. And I don't see it dying down anytime soon. But in terms of like the competing aspect, oh yeah, I'm always going to have that in my blood somewhere. It's like I want to keep playing. I'll have it in my flesh and blood.
Oh,
The low
it's
hanging fruit.
easy
I'm
pluck
always going to
right
have that
there.
somewhere, and I want to compete more. But it's because it's a physical card game, time elements are a real thing. I'm not 22 and kind of surfing couches anymore. I am 36 years old and I have mortgages that I have to adhere to. So a lot less time, but when that time gets commit, I do feel like it needs to be exceptional. And I did feel like that the calling in Las Vegas was a pretty exceptional experience, aside from the fact that, we're still pandemic still exists, but literally everyone there is wearing a mask. And this is the one thing that I enjoy about card players is they just want to play cards. It does not matter what you tell them to do. They're going to do it. If you tell them to put on masks, they're going to put on masks. If you tell them to vaccinate, they're going to vaccinate. If you tell them they need to have a test every 4 hours, they're going to test every 4 hours. If you told them to go out and buy flamingo hats and brown suits, everyone there would be wearing a flamingo hat and a brown suit. They want to sit down and they want to play some cards. And that's what I liked about it.
That's a good thematic one right there. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing that just for fun. Like, you just kind of see what you get away with. It's like, all right, we need masks, vaccinations, and everyone needs to wear elf ears. And it's like, okay, well, you gotta get myself some elf. Do Vulcan ears count? Are those all right? Like, or do
Is
any?
constructed a silly putty? Does that work?
Yeah. What are the parameters? What is the peak? How high above my brow? But you're right. The passion is there. Now, one thing that I have always been in awe of in our interactions are playing is the fact that you're just an excellent deck builder. You're creative. You don't want to just work within the framework. You want to kind of bust out of that and break the mold and see that kind of that area around what people would consider what makes a good deck. You need tempo, you need this, you need that, whatever, blah blah blah. You want to sort of explore those uncharted territories. You want to bust through the fog of war when it comes to deck building and really create some cool stuff. But at the same time, you do recognize, like you mentioned, like you may have broken your head sometimes to try to make some stupid ideas work. I've been there, absolutely. I always tell people that the most punishing aspect of card playing is being creative, because at 95% of the time you're going to get, your ass stomped on the road to some type of success. At the
Extremely
same time,
difficult.
it's incredibly difficult because it's so punishing, because while you're out there in the open field trying to work your magic and try something new, there are people who are just using the tried, tested, and true stuff to just completely skewer you the entire time. It's not. God bless all those who are out there theory crafting and trying new brews. That's all I gotta say. But you do know what a tier 1 deck looks like, and I want to ask you, what to you is a Flesh and Blood tier 1 deck look like? What is it? What constitutes an excellently built deck?
Yeah, it's kind of it's definitely like a tougher thing to, put an aspect here because again, the game is still fairly young. And I think that this strategy aspect in terms of, again, game engine's very different. Like card advantage, I don't think is really a thing in this game. The way that card advantage is going to work is effectively, it's like a virtual card advantage. It's like, how do your cards effectively stack up against your opponents? That's always going to be your number one question. And so for me, what's going to make a deck strong in Flesh and Blood is going to be having peak points of acceleration, and then being able to recover from having a lot of weak points, and your opponent being able to kind of like hammer those points at a certain element. And so that's where my idea comes in, is just how do your turns stack up and how do you actually get to your effective turn? And so I'll take like a Bravo for existence. Or for existence. Of course he exists.
Hey,
Bravo for
there
instance.
for existence, yeah.
So Bravo has some like immensely powerful cards. The issue is actually getting to those turns and how often do you have them. If you're able to connect those turns, a couple turns in a row, that's how Bravo wins the game. But you have to just kind of naturally pick these cards up, and you have to have the turns kind of work out normally for you. And it's just so many things have to stack up in order for this deck to work that I feel like it's like kind of a joke. Like I wanted to play Bravo, and I tried to play Bravo a lot when I first started, just because I just kind of like these big dumb idiots who take big swings at stuff. It just doesn't work that well because it's super inconsistent. And so that's like one of the main aspects is consistency. How often do you get to your strong point? And then the second one is going to be how efficiently do you get to that strong point as well? If you get to your strong point and you're at half health, it's a lot worse than if you get to your strong point and you're at, 25 health instead. That 5 health doesn't seem like much, but that's like a full command and conquer attack. Like, being able to have those couple extra points of health is a really big deal. And so one of the things I'm always looking at is a way to just kind of cheat that line. That's the next one, is like just the efficiency that you have. It's why 4 attack is so much stronger than 3 attack. But that same element, it kind of makes 2 attack pretty strong as well, because your opponent doesn't necessarily want to block 2 attack. But that's not necessarily a good thing. Like, I want my opponents to block as much as I can possibly get them to block. It's not a strong element from the blocking side. So that's always the next thing I'm looking at, is like, how does my natural elements of the deck kind of cheat that line a little bit? And that's where Chain really, really exploited that line constantly. It's like, he's finding access to extra cards. That access to extra cards scales up. He's got some of the strongest armor in the game. His attacks will naturally scale. And then on top of that, he's got elements in his deck that can literally work against all of the different archetypes that are currently in acceptance for Flesh and Blood. Like, holy crap, how do you get more powerful than that? Was kind of the idea for me. So number 1 is consistency. Number 2 is efficiency. And then the third one, which I don't think we have quite found yet, is just how high is your peak? That's where the Bolton idea came into me, is because Bolton's peak, oh my gosh, like, that guy has 30 damage turns, literally 30 damage turns. And then on top of that, he's healing. And then on top of that, he's storing his soul, which is literally one of his resource systems, is the amount of cards you can store into your soul. This guy's getting all of those in one turn just because you found 2 copies of a card? Like, that is terrifyingly powerful. And so it's always going to be probably the order that I look for them in as well. Consistency, efficiency, peak point.
And those are, I mean, like you mentioned, a hero like Bolton who can just get that all done. But there's certainly some finesse that needs to be mastered in order to get there, because I don't want to sell the Flesh and Blood community short by any means. But the fact is, if you can say that, this guy does 30 damage turns, is able to replenish life and resource all in one go off of a 2 or 3 card, I say quote unquote 2 and 3 card combo, but with just by finding these particular anchor point cards, why is not everybody doing this and racing to find these mirror matchups, or whoever can pull it off the fastest? And there is some finesse in terms of actually being able to pilot it to a degree, right?
Yeah, I mean, part of it's consistency as well. If literally the peak point of your deck relies on you drawing 2 copies of this card, that's not exactly consistency. But yeah, I mean, that's just, like, to me, part of the appeal of Flesh and Blood in general. And I don't think that's going to be, like, involved in any deck. In fact, I've never really seen it that way, because practice is going to be so much of how your deck performs anyway, like understanding your matchups and just knowing how your deck's going to flow through. There's not like a curve out strategy in Flesh and Blood. It is literally management. And so when I look at a hero like Bolton, and people are like, oh, well, he's kind of difficult. And I'm just like, well, I don't really think he's that difficult. I just think you need to learn the aspects of him, and that he's kind of, prompting you to think about things in a different way. Anyone who tells you that a deck is not what you choose because of difficulty, I feel like is just giving you, like, really selling you the wrong element there. If the answer is you shouldn't play a deck because it's difficult, the question I have is, should you be playing in this event right now if your goal is going to be strictly winning? Because that just means you haven't practiced enough. Like, no deck is, like, more difficult than the next one. It's just going to be like, how much did you practice and how do you understand the matchups, really? They're all kind of the same thing. It's figure out what they're doing and then manage the resources.
And you're right. There's a lot of elements to the game that a lot of people will just overlook. And like you mentioned, 4 attack is not just 1 damage greater than 3. It's the fact that if you're threatening for on hit damage or any on hit effect or anything in that regard, where you're getting your opponent to so low, that's a 2 card block in certain cases, or it's a card and
armor
or an equipment.
Force him to spend something else.
Exactly.
Thumbs up.
It's a 2 element block for the most part, unless you're rocking like a red sink below or something. I remember when we were discussing, we were just going through some of the random heroes and such, and I was talking to you about Rhinar and Rhinar's Intimidate effect. And one of the greatest things that you said to me was like, what? Why would I want them to not give me cards to block? Why would I want to intimidate cards? I want their cards. Give me your cards. And I was like, that is such a fascinating perspective, and I get it. Like, Rhinar will intimidate cards out of your hand that they can't block with, but those are resources that they can then use to come back at you. So in the same
naturally forces them to make the right play. I don't like that.
Exactly. Like, I'm now taking out, I'm removing bad decisions out of your pool of, that you could potentially screw up. Like, your decision tree is now pruned down to, you either block with this 1 card in hand or you don't. But I want you to make bad choices, and that's where Intimidate can sometimes bite you in the ass. And you put me onto that, where it's like, I want your cards. I want to give you scenarios where you have to make decisions, and they're probably going to be bad if you're a bad player. And that, I think, is where there's going to be this little bit of a chasm between good players and excellent players, is understanding where those little margins, where 4 is, it's not just one more greater than 3, it's infinitely greater because you're doing damage and you're getting another card out of them. It's just fantastic. 4 is like a 6 if you're taking 2 cards out of their hand to that degree.
I mean,
I always
that's a
think
fairly
that's
strong way to look at it. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, to me, that defense reactions can't be played on Command and Conquer is really what makes it such a powerful thing. Like if Command and Conquer was 4 and didn't have that line, it would kind of be very similar to like I think the card that it is. But the fact that it's 6 and says defense reactions can't be played, it's like really it's like a 4 that's like bolded, italicized, and underlined is really what it feels like. Where you're like, oh, I really gotta block this thing.
So
this is a lot.
Flesh and Blood's competitive future. We just saw you were there. You saw it firsthand. There's a lot more elements coming through in terms of big tournaments. The nationals are starting to roll out. Can Flesh and Blood compete with Magic? Because Magic just announced their own, major event in Las Vegas coming shortly. They're going to start rolling out more and more events. They just sort of pulled the rug from a lot of the competitive scene, cutting some of the money out of it, kind of pruning that down, but it's still the top dog. They exist in a digital format as well as a paper format, whereas Flesh and Blood is really just digging deep into the paper thing. Do you think that when it comes down to it, does Flesh and Blood have the chops to compete with Magic from this perspective, from the paper perspective, these massive, conventions, so these huge opens like this?
I mean, yes and no. It's like one of the things I'm always looking at for these kinds of events is like, to me, it's always been kind of interesting that these events make money in my head. Like, I'm not in charge of running this sort of stuff, so I don't really know how the money aspect of it works. But when I see 1,000 players show up to an event where you rented a ballroom at a convention center, I'm like, where did the money come from in this? Let's say every player there spent, I don't know, $200. And there was 1,500 people. Let's just say there was 1,500 people there. Like, what's the math on that, real quick? So it's 1,500. Is like, I don't know.
A lot of money, 300K. I think something like that.
300K. So 1,500 times 200. Excuse me, real quick. Yeah, so $300,000. Like, that's if every single player here spent $200. And now, mind you, this is gross. Like, this isn't $300,000 in my pocket. It's like, well, how much money did you have to spend to get to this point? Because you had to hire employees, you had to book the room, you had to spend time for employees booking the room, you then had to do planning stuff, you had to do management, you had to do travel, you had to do et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And really, when it kind of adds up, I'm always like, are these events making money or are they breaking even? Because really, this event is like, this is the marketing tool, right? This is the reason you playing the game, is to go to these events. So it's really just like, to them, this is part of the cost. It's like, oh, we have to host these events because otherwise, why the hell is anyone playing this card game? Like, you're just gonna, what are you gonna just sit with the bros and like sink a few jars every weekend and like sling some cardboard around? Sure, that sounds fantastic, and I want to do that, but you have to be able to build out that community first. And the way you build out that community is going to be hosting events. So when I look at this kind of aspect to it, if they can keep hosting events, like if you can keep forwarding that, yeah, your game's going to grow because people want to go to these events. They're fantastic. They're so much fun. It's the reason that this is like the reason I am alive, is to play card games at this point. So when I kind of look at this, I definitely think they can compete with Magic because the community, when I went to the calling in Las Vegas, it's like everyone was so accepting and so nice. And it was just like, it could have just been because everyone's kind of been holed up for a couple of years, but this really felt like a strong experience to me. And for Magic, the experience has often been very similar, but my introduction to Magic and my life pursuit through Magic was just so much different than it's been for Flesh and Blood. For Flesh and Blood, I kind of picked this up and I was like, let's see how this works. For Magic, it was like the way I got into this. That was the breathing point. That's when I took that first breath where I was like, oh, card games, this is it. I definitely think you can compete, but there is a pretty high saturation in card games right now. There's a lot of fantastic games that I have been playing lately that are strategy and variant strategy related. It's difficult to compete with them. So how they do it and how they're going to drive this aspect, I'm very curious to see. But I think that they're highlighting it properly right now with like the way that they're awarding the events, where it's like you win the event, you get this card that's functionally the same as all these other cards we've made. However, it's got this really cool look to it that nobody else is going to get. By the way, it sells on Facebook for like $1,900, and you're like, that's pretty cool. If you're a player who just likes dollars, fantastic. If you're a player who really likes to collect weird, strange things like I do, who has so many old foils from Magic that cannot be played in any deck whatsoever, but are somehow worth a lot of money because they're very rare and in excellent condition, that's part of me as well. So, I want to do both of these things, and so it's appealing to me on multiple angles. But I see it continuing to go. Like again, I think the game is very unique. I think the game is strongly built, and it's being kind of developed by people from New Zealand who, when they mess something up, they go, yeah, we fucked that up. We're sorry about that. We're not gonna make that mistake again. I'm like, oh, okay, I believe you. You're just willing to accept the fact that you made a mistake, which is exactly what all of these companies should be doing. And one of the reasons I'm very disappointed in Magic right now is because it seems like they're just like, is it me? Oh no, it's the children who are wrong.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, come on, y'all have been around for how many years now? Like, just listen up for a second, all right? Stop. Do the right thing. That's what we're asking.
Yeah, and for some, it's not as easy for certain companies to just kind of drop the mea culpa, which, when they did ban certain cards and kind of pruned away a lot of the gas behind Chain's whole mantra, the getting rid of seeds, and also the Duskblade that just got axed before it even hit the ground, where they're just like, all right, we that's on us, before you even complain. Exactly. It's just kind of like when you show up when the car's on fire, like, okay, before you get mad, let me explain. That's basically what they did right there. Yeah.
That's the way. Somebody lit this on fire, all right? And we know who did it. But
it's a long time.
I kind of want to cut it on this real quick. I'm sorry to just like completely disrupt the train on this one real quick. Banning stuff sucks, but that's a physical card game. You're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. We're sorry. We don't want to just let this run rampant. It's either completely adjust the rules of the way the Living Legend thing works, or just ban the seeds. Duskblade is the one that hurt so much because it hadn't even, like you said, it hadn't even hit the ground yet. When I read that card, I was like, really? Like, I'll just ignore the fact that Jade exists to begin with. But mind you, it's again physical card game. This stuff had to be developed, had to be skinned, it had to be templated, had to be shipped, printed, cut, packaged, distributed, etc. There's just so many elements that come into play here that like Duskblade was probably on the way through and finalized like months before we realized Chain was the most broken deck. So just bannings are going to happen, and it really sucks. Accept it, but trust me, these are New Zealand developers. They know when they fucked up. They're not going to do that again. They may fuck up again, but not in the same way. So, apologize for my cursing and all that stuff here, but it's going on. That's the first time I've ever said cursing instead of cussing, by the way. They know. I mean, New Zealand is great. All right. New Zealand is like California Island. It's like, that's the place to be. People in California, you may think they're crazy, but trust me, they just get it. This place is fantastic. I'm the happiest I've ever been here. And I came from Texas in this element too, and you know how crazy Texas is going right now. New Zealand gets it, all right? They're the ones.
They're also the home of Middle Earth. I don't care what Amazon says. They are Middle Earth for forever and always. But you're right. And one thing that I really wish upon any card gaming community is that they need to understand that cards are not dreamed up a weekend before they're printed. They are in development for a long time. So oftentimes, I mean, other than, Duskblade, they admitted and said it was something that was kind of, I don't want to say a throw-in, but it was a late game.
They pushed it.
Yeah, and they didn't get the testing in as necessary. But when cards come out, like they are not aware of what's going on with other metas. Like cards that are being designed now are going to be inserted into metas that don't exist yet because those cards haven't even been announced yet. So this is kind of how far down the line they are.
Very often it's about 18 months.
Which is huge. Think about that. I've been playing the game for like 4 or 5 months, and 18 months from now, who the hell knows what's going to go on?
I've been playing the game for like 4 or 5 weeks, and the meta's changed like 5 times.
Exactly. Like, let's just all calm down here. I just wanted to toss in a little real life anecdote when you're talking about when you show up and the car's on fire. Ages ago, when I lived in Montreal, me and my buddies used to go to watch baseball games, the Blue Jays in Toronto, and it was about a 5.5 to 6 hour drive. And there was usually about 6 or 7 of us that would go. And we'd stay there for a few days and watch a few games, but we would rent a van and drive down there. And one of my buddies, we went to go rent the van, and he was contemplating getting the insurance. He's like, well, will we need it? I'm like, yeah, get the insurance. I'm 21. Please. I'm an idiot, but we're going to get the insurance if there's one thing you hear me about. So we go there, and this guy was so confident. Now, my dad owned a van, which I have driven multiple times, at the time, and this was a van, but he insisted on driving because he, quote unquote, I drive a Maxima. It's a big car. I know how to handle a big car. Well, needless to say that in the underground parking of Rogers Center, which I think at the time was still the Sky Dome, he turned a corner too sharply and completely wrecked the side of the van against a cement pillar. Solid. Completely from side mirror to rear, brake light scraped and cracked and just destroyed the entire thing. Now, we were there for a few more days, so we just drove around it. It doesn't matter. But when we drove the car back and gave it in to the people, like we walked into the place and the people ahead of us in line we're here to pick up our van. And we're behind them. And the people at the counter look, oh, perfect. They're returning it. Just give us about half an hour to clean and sanitize it. We're like, hold on a second. Here are the keys. Here's the insurance. You're going to need another car because this is an absolute write-off. And it was just the worst. Left side of the van looked brilliant. Right side of the van looked like it had been, like the two T-Rexes had destroyed it in the Lost World. Like it was terrible. Anyway.
That scene where Jeff Goldblum's like, hey, with the torch, and he's running away.
Exactly. Right after Dr.
Grant. They were following Jeff Goldblum, but they turned the right too sharply, and that's how they hit the pillar. Like, God, why did I follow Jeff Goldblum?
It was essentially that. Remember in the Lost World when that hammerhead kind of like bald-headed dinosaur smashes the guy through the side of the SUV?
Oh yeah.
That's basically what it looked like.
That's where you just pull into the place and just turn to the right.
Oh yeah.
Look out for pillars though.
God bless the kind of the contactless key drop after hours where you just you park it in a spot and put the keys in and you walk away like this. That's essentially kind of how that went. But yeah, that was the best decision I think I had ever made in my life was no. We're paying $10 for insurance. There's 6 of us. like we can split this. It's all right. I know we're all poor.
See, this is where the planning and preparation highlight comes in. It was like the number one aspect of your deck was understanding. What can go wrong? $10? Man, seems like a great one to me.
Exactly. That was the $10 insurance sideboard on our trip, and it worked out well. Like people packing
tech cars in case you run into that matchup. Okay, I promise you, the $10 is worth in this case.
Yeah. You owe us $30,000. Nope. Snag out of the arsenal. Not happening. Here's my insurance paper.
I'll take 3.
Exactly. Anyway, real life skills that come from card game planning. I love it. Nathan Zamora, aka Admirable. That is a wrap for the first segment, but I want you to stick around for the Go Again segment. 8 questions, rapid fire. You're ready. That's what's happening. The Instant Speed Podcast is brought to you by Red Riot Games, my favorite place to play Flesh and Blood. The quest for glory never ends, and while you're fine-tuning your brand new Oldhim Fatigue deck, or just foiling out your Lexi Lightning build, Red Riot Game offers the best price on singles, and not to mention a ton of wicked cool playmats to give those cards a great place to sit. You can help out the Instant Speed Podcast by checking out Red Riot Games through the link in the description. All right, we're back, and it's time to go wide with Admirable as we go again on a series of rapid-fire questions. Now, I say rapid-fire. They're going to come at you quick, hot and heavy, Admirable, but your answers, keep them curt, keep them concise, but if you got stuff to say, man, I ain't going to stop you. So if you're ready, we can start firing away.
Go again.
All right, here we go with my first action. What is the most unique facet of Flesh and Blood? What makes it different? What makes it unique?
The card game engine is what does it for me. It's not like other card games where you just kind of like scale your resource points out and curve out and play your biggest cards. It's management the entire time, which is a lot of meta process in building your deck. And that to me is a very unique aspect that I have run into only one time ever, and that was in a 1-player card game. And now this is in a 2-player card game. Very, very it's such a core fundamental aspect of this game. It's going to make it, I think thrive for a long time. It's just game engine unique.
So what hero speaks most to you? Now, we touched upon this in the previous segment. You said that you really loved Kano, but maybe that might have changed. What is a Admirable style hero?
I mean, it's Kano. I mean, it really is. Kano's breaking all the rules. He accepts the underdog position. He's utilizing your opponent's turn. His spells are incredibly powerful, but, at what cost? And that is really the kind of hero that speaks to me on it is, it's break all the rules. Not the law, but break the rules. It's just, that's the way to do everything is find a way to step outside of those boundaries and go, but it says I can. It's Kano.
That's it. It's not your turn. It's our turn. That's the Kano motto, and I love it. You and I have casted some events together in the past. I know that your energy is infectious. It is the best in the business, I got to say. But if there was a series, a different style, of broadcast where casters actually got introduced kind of like wrestlers. You got some walkout music and some pyro even. What would your walkout music be if it was like
Oh,
pro wrestling
jeez.
style?
I really feel like it would just be something that's like completely out of tone for me, where it's like, I don't know why I've been doing this a lot lately, but I've just been listening to all these Pearl Jam albums that I have again, and I'm like, dang, these are so good. And I'm Still Alive. Just ignore all the lyrics in that song. Just like encapsulate the energy and the essence that song has. I feel like that's really where my head is at for all of this sort of stuff. Is like, yeah, look at all this gray hair that's in the beard. We're getting close to the end, but I'm still alive. Like that's kind of where my head is at for all of this stuff. I think I'd probably just pick weird Pearl Jam songs every single time.
Every time I think about this, I mean, I love the iconic cult of personality that CM Punk comes out to. I think that's just so good. For myself, Sweetness by Jimmy Eat World. Not
Ooh.
that it's like one of my favorite. It's a band that I love. It's a song that I love. It's not by no means one of my favorite songs or anything, but it just feels like it's perfect. And if you're out there, Sweetness by Jimmy Eat World is my walk-up music.
Makes
And
Flake
good,
sense.
it's got to be. Are you listening? Is basically how it just keeps asking you. Well, are you listening? Hello. All right.
McFly. No, no, not the Back to the Future part.
You have casted a lot of huge events. You've also partaken in some pretty big tournaments. But I want to ask you. You said that you've kind of been, chasing that win. But at this point in your life, would you rather cast a major final or would you rather play in that major final?
Goodness. I've overcome, I think, the desire to win an event no matter what energy. When I was a wee lad, that's definitely what I was chasing, but we're kind of past that point. However, I have cast a number of events. I still do enjoy this aspect of it. The storytelling and highlighting of other players' experiences. If I had that when I was a youngin, who knows how my life would have been different. But I didn't have that, so I'm kind of like hopefully the stepping stone for that aspect and having it continue to grow for all time. I think that because I have cast events finals, which are insanely exciting, like it's such a rush. I think I'd still rather win because I haven't like won a major. I really want to win a major. I think at some point in my life it's going to happen because I'm probably going to be 72 years old and sitting down at that card table and shuffling up, and these kids are going to be looking at my hands and they'll be like, "Golly, this guy really knows how to shuffle cards." I'll be like, "I've just been doing it my whole life, man. It's really not that hard. You just sit down and shuffle some cards for a couple hours a day when you're doing this and you're thinking about it. I just shuffle cards and I'm thinking about it." I think I'd rather win than cast one at this point, but I think in terms of if I had to pick what was going on the whole time, even though winning lots of events would be awesome, I still think I'd rather be casting them all.
And it's funny, he's like 72 years old. They're gonna have like Tales of Aria remastered, The Return kind of thing by then. Who knows? I mean, that would be awesome. I mean, if you think about it, 72 years old, it's like 38, 37, 38 years away for us, I believe. I mean,
The cards are going to be so powerful by then. People are going to be like, "They really banned seeds?"
Yeah, what is this garbage? They have like Ultra Chain by now, like Voltron Chain, where it's like they're gonna have 5 heroes that if you draw all 5 copies, you create like a monster Ultron version of them. Yeah, that's another question that we could dive into in a future episode. Is like, what are some like interesting extra kind of variations of what the game can be? We'll put that on the burner, honestly. That said, what's better for you, both as a player, I suppose, but also as a broadcaster? A huge winning draw or a very creative, lethal, or winning play?
Wow. Golly, that is such a hard question. They always feel like they kind of mix, like, and that's always one of the things that I think is very interesting. There was a player who went by the moniker Amnesiac, and he introduced me to this idea that kind of always existed in my head, but it wasn't so elegantly put. Where he's like, you don't just play with the cards in your hand, you play with the cards in your deck. And so every single turn was visualizing what are the draws that change it, what are the draws that change it, what are the draws that change it, and making your hand work to that aspect of it. And so usually like that giant creative play that wins the game, it involves the draw too. Because when players are setting those things up, they're accounting for what their next turn's going to look like. Flesh and Blood, I think it's a little bit harder of a thing to do because it's a refuel the hand situation. So like just understanding the fundamental aspects of it and kind of seeing like where those critical points in your deck hit. That to me is it's an element of Flesh and Blood. It hasn't even come close to being hit yet. Like when players finding that aspect, and I think once that's get found, you're going to kind of see it, and it's going to be like, oh my gosh, well this game's awesome. but in traditional card games, I would say the big draw is usually the one that excites me more.
So you and I are humongous Simpsons fans. Obviously, you were born in the '80s, grew up in the '90s. That's our wheelhouse, and the Simpsons is kind of, we get it, and it gets us. What would be a hero that most resembles Sideshow Bob? Not necessarily physically, but I mean just from an aspect of their motivations, their character arc. You know, who is the Sideshow Bob of Flesh and Blood?
This has got to be like a multi-character thing, right? Like, I'm kind of picturing like Sideshow Bob. He wanted to entertain. It got completely derailed by Cecil, who incidentally made that happen. And then he just wanted to accomplish something, but he didn't really care what, right? He's like, I don't care if it's this evil, hideous humanity, mankind thing that I'm doing. He just wanted to accomplish something. I'm always like, I'm looking at like Kano, who really looks like that they're just ready to perform. Like, I feel like if they had somehow gotten a role in Hamilton, that Kano, it certainly would have been one of the characters I was thinking of. But then, like, you just want to accomplish something that feels like Young Chain, where, you know, Young Chain looks like they're a bit lost. It's like, yeah, maybe this isn't the way to be going. You know, brother, just calm down a little bit. But he just really wants to accomplish something. He doesn't care about what it means. It's got to be a mix of those two, I feel like. Kano for the flair and Chain for the evil chaos aspect side.
And Leviah for the hair, for sure. Easily. It's got to be it. Finally, Mr. Admirable, Flesh and Blood 5 years from now. Where is it standing? What does it look like?
Flesh and Blood in 5 years. Very similar to where it is right now. I think that by that point, we'll have understood how to battle off the pandemic side of things. I say this with very, very strange regard, but Dick Cheney and Bush were right about the pandemic aspect. I never thought I'd say that they were right about something, because they really initialized that pandemic, hunt in terms of how to combat it. But I feel like we've hit like this really serendipitous point with Flesh and Blood, where it's like we're finally starting to get to the point where we can start stepping out of the house and actually going places. And a physical card game has now been introduced to the concept of hosting events. And wow, do I want to go? I have been holed up for a long time. This little aspect, this cube that I'm in right now, it's been a long time I've been spending in here. And I can't wait to get out and shuffle up some cards. Sit with the boys and sink a few jaws. You know, it's like one of the things I'm seeing with this. I think Flesh and Blood truly is going to be continuing to expand that notion and strengthen that community it has. I don't think it has to grow too much, to be quite honest with you. I think it just needs to keep its strength going. And I think that's where this game is in 5 years. Just a very strong core community.
It's kind of like a horse that's just been kind of like, I'm not saying the game, but just like us as a community have just been in the gates, just waiting for the bell to ring so we could fire out of there. We've been hopped up on so many, we're just worked up and we want to get going and we want to get rip roaring at full speed. Like we don't want to come out at a trot or a gallop. We want to just go at full throttle, and it's coming, and we're getting there, and this is the first few tastes of it, and this has been an enlightening experience. Nathan Zamora, aka Admirable, I do sincerely appreciate you being on the show. Your insights, your energy, everything is always top notch, and we are going to have you back sooner than later, because there's just so much that you and I have to talk about, but there are time limits to this, and we cannot get into everything. So for those of you listening, basically, I mean, for those of you listening, if you choose to listen to only one show, which we recommend here, and it better be this show, he will be back. You will get more Admirable down the line. So, friends, if Admirable specifically, for those of you who want more and want to consume more, where do we follow you? How do we find you out there in the internet ethereal?
Unfortunately, the main aspect is @That's Admirable on Twitter. If you don't use Twitter, though, there's probably just not many two ways to contact me, to be quite honest with you. I stream occasionally, but I know streaming is certainly something that it's kind of hit the back burner for me. But @That's Admirable on Twitter. If you ship me a tweet over there, it's probably honestly where my main schedule comes from. Is like, what work do I have to do? It's all going to depend on send me a message on Twitter. It's such a weird aspect for me, but that's the place to find me. I promise you. You ship me a message, I'm responding.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating too that despite the fact that like right next to me, within shot over here, I have 2 planners. You'd think that I would look at them once or twice ever. No, I rely on our producer Mark Theus to kind of just poke me now and then and be like, "Don't forget to wake up tomorrow." I'm like, Right. Yeah, just if I'm not poked or prodded or people go out of my way, I have no clue what's going on.
Instant scheduling.
It's the worst. And I can't do
Someone
any.
help me.
You'd think that in the grand scheme of things, like I could juggle, like that's a skill I have, but like adult management of my life has just eluded me for so long.
Yeah.
I would gladly trade that up in a heartbeat. No, that doesn't happen. But friends, thank you so much for listening to the Instant Speed podcast. Again, I always mention you're not losing if you're learning, so keep shuffling up those cards and playing. Next time you might win. Who knows? And again, thank you to our producer, Marktheus983, our sponsor, Red Riot Games, and of course, our guest, Admirable. We'll catch you soon here on the Instant Speed podcast.